We are ready to start our next talk. The topic this morning is offshore fishing. We have 5 highly skilled anglers on stage, and we're going to squeeze in for as much information as we can, so when you go offshore, you can catch the best fish you can catch. Now, how we're going to start is I'm going to chat to each of you, and I want a little bit of a rundown on the style of fishing you do, and a little bit of a touch on your journey as an offshore angler. Colby, we'll start with you. Where's home, and what's the offshore fishing that you do?
Home for me is Mission Beach, just south of Cairns, and I do a whole range of stuff offshore fishing, but for me it's mainly offshore sports fishing, so casting and jigging on the reef and out on the shelf as well. Do a little bit of trolling as well, but yeah, mostly for me, I love the casting and jigging, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm from up at Port Douglas, North Queensland, and offshore fishing for me is everything from the inshore wonky holes out to the deep dropping out the shelf, GTs, and you're sort of jigging in between top water, so get amongst pretty much all offshore fishing.
Benny, where's home for you?
Home for me is Brisbane, so born and bred in Redcliffe and right on the foot of Moreton Bay. So offshore fishing for me is basically, I grew up, bread and butter for me was offshore fishing for snapper off Moreton Island, and then my passion for top water sort of grew, and so I just started targeting big GTs off Moreton Island, and sort of try to unwind the puzzles that I could do offshore off there for big GTs and Spanish mackerel.
So, Sam, we've chatted to 3 Queenslanders. You're not from this part of the world, you're from New South.
Yeah, g'day everyone, Sam Gilchrist and Rolly, a little 9-year-old Rolly. We're from Coffs Harbour, New South Wales, Premier State and current State of Origin champions. Dogs.
Can I chin him right now?
You can. I'll gallon you. Really focused, like the last few years with Rolly Boy, been focusing on a lot of estuary stuff. We're just starting to get Rolly offshore, chasing snapper, kings, really focusing lately on, or passion is topwater kingfish for sure, but with the explosion of the topwater yellowfin fishery, that's been a key focus in the last few years, and even trying to finesse a few snapper topwater as well, which is a real challenge.
Oh, interesting. We'll delve a little bit more into that later, I think. Tim, where's home, mate?
G'day. Tascast, Tim Whybrow. I've relocated up here from Tasmania, so a lot of my offshore fishing has been the continental shelf down in Tassie. Quite blessed down there. It's only a 25-kilometre punch out until you're in 550 metres and you're chasing swordfish or your bluefin, even your barrels in close. We've been catching barrels down there in 25 metres of water, which is just insane. It's something I've been trying to get Benny to come down and get top water. So a lot of bluefin tuna for me, blue eye, even manually jigging blue eye in 500 metres on 800 gram jigs is a lot of fun and nice to be buckled.
What a great diversity in fishing amongst our 5 anglers. Colby, the fishing you do now, I gather that's not where you started in offshore. How did you get started, and what were the species you were chasing?
For me, I started off as a freshwater fisherman. Started off chasing Murray cod in the rivers, trout, redfin, stuff like that. But with the freshwater fishing, it can be quite quiet at times. You don't catch a lot of fish and you don't get a lot of bites. So I was always kind of drawn to the offshore fishing because that's where you can have some amazing sessions and catch a lot of fish and have a lot of fun. So just got kind of sucked into the offshore and saltwater fishing along the way, and yeah, it's definitely a fun form of fishing if you just want to get out, catch a lot of fish, big fish, they fight hard, and there's plenty of options out there. So for me, I just kind of got dragged across and never looked back.
Nico, what was it about offshore fishing that really struck a chord, that really drew you in?
Yeah, I think it's like any angler as a kid, you start off catching the river species, and as you grow older, the passion really builds and everything has to be bigger and better. So any opportunity to get offshore was taken up by me, and before I knew it, I was trying to target every fish that was in Grant's Guide to Fishers, so just had to keep trying for bigger and better fish.
Now, Benny, you're telling us, you grew up on the shores of Moreton Bay, you sort of evolved. Did you have goals as you traversed your way through offshore fishing? It's like, I want to catch this one day, and then I want to get that. Was it a journey?
Yeah, it certainly was, especially with the sort of the giant rally offshore off Moreton. It's not an easy task up there, and I suppose when I first started doing it up there wasn't a whole lot of guys doing it, so it was more of a try and discover and learn as you go. But the real goal for me, and I think for any GT angler, was to hit that 50 kilo mark and really had that end goal in the back of my head. A couple of times off Moreton I got very close, and then
So when you first set that goal, you said I want a 50. How long did it take you to get it?
I think it took around 3 years, so which is probably it's probably a short amount of time given where we're fishing, and it wasn't off Moreton, so I got very close a couple of times at Moreton, and those were sort of estimated fish that weren't weighed fish. And the one time I did take scales, I went up to Yeppoon knowing that's really, I think, one of the capitals of Australia when it comes to big GTs, inshore GTs. And the one time I took scales in a sling was the one time I finally cracked that 50.
Now, offshore fishing, there can be so many war stories about things that went wrong, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Did you have that fish on multiple times and you found multiple ways to lose it?
There was one particular trip I went with Matty Schultz off Fraser Pelagic Pursuit. We did a filming trip for Haynes, and on that particular trip the GTs were unbelievable. It was, I don't know, in the first few hours we caught sort of 20 to 30 fish over the 30 kilo mark. But on that particular trip, and again, they're all estimates, right, until you land them and you actually weigh them, but there was a couple of fish that I hooked and had hooks straightened, or you got taken into the reef a couple of times, and they were sort of 50 kilo plus fish off Fraser Island. So there was a few failures along the way, but eventually you get there, and that's the reward, I suppose.
It makes the rewards that much sweeter. Now, Sam, we've done some talks previously today, and the last one that we did was about families and friends and getting them into fishing. And Rob said having a mentor in fishing is an important thing. Did you have any mentors when you started getting into your offshore fishing?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think family, my grandfather was an avid angler, and, fishing back then was significantly different to what it is now. Technology-wise, there was no such thing as gel-spun lines or braids. It was all monofilament. Fairly basic, but still collect your fresh bait. You get the basics right. You harvest your fresh bait from the sea or the creek or estuary or wherever you're going. You utilise that fresh bait in the right location with the right rig at the right time, and you just produce results. Now these days, you sort of don't have to do that anymore. You've got enough artificial, really wonderful replicas of what you used to use as fresh bait, so you can catch the same species without having to go and catch your bait. In terms of mentors, I think it was, your Rex Hunts, your Kay Bush, your Steve Starling, they were the figureheads of the sport back then. I won't ruin everyone's day by singing the Rex Hunt theme song, but I could still do that, I reckon, now. And, those were the fellas that you really looked up to, apart from, my grandfather. And I was thinking about what the lads were saying about, their transition to sports fishing and goals and offshore fishing. I can still remember when I was perhaps Rolly's age, flicking through all my father's fishing magazines, and I was really captured by, or I loved an overhead setup, how the guide placings were. You had a beautifully freshly spooled overhead, chockers full of, 500 to 700 metres worth of mono, and the guys chasing marlin off the rocks down at Jarvis Bay. And for us, I spent most of my teenage years on Martinbird Island at Coss, and a little wiry fella carrying a bucket full of slimies over what felt like Mount Everest at the time, to send one out under a balloon off the front and hope that a bloody tuna swims past and eats it. It's really, I still look back to those days, and I didn't have a key mentor as such, but I hope to be that, and I think I already am for Rolly Boy.
A lot of offshore fishing and the species that you target are very aspirational. We have people here who dream of catching GTs, big finger mark. It can be a little bit daunting for some people to make that step into the offshore realm. How did you find it, Tim, when you went, that's what I want to do? Was it an easy transition?
I think for me, I just grew up being around the water. So I used to see my father going out and, going out with all of his friends and them coming back and telling all of the stories. So for me, it was just the unknown and the curiosity. And there's so many things when you do go offshore that can go wrong. And, I'm sure we've all had our fair share of stories of hiccups. And you learn so much every offshore trip that you do. You're not just thinking about sitting in an estuary where the sun's blazing down and you can hear absolutely everything. You're quite literally wide awake, so aware of everything that's going on. And I think that's what makes a great offshore fisherman as well, is being aware, thinking 5 steps ahead. It's like a pilot flying a 737. You're always thinking 5 steps ahead of what can go wrong, and making sure as well that everyone else is safe on the boat. There's a lot to think about when you are out there. But that transition, getting back to the question, for me, it was just something that I was naturally drawn to. I think I was always so curious and, just wanted to fulfill that goal of learning more and more, and it's a continuous learning curve as well.
Yeah, styles of fishing are very much one of those things. You don't choose to do them. They sort of tap you on the shoulder and said, I'm with you for life. This is what we're going to do. For me, it's the freshwater. For you guys, it's the offshore. Now, for the folks who get into offshore fishing, it can be a little bit daunting. You head out of the mouth of the bar or the seaway and there's just blue. Where do you start? How do you find that needle in the haystack? Nico, how do you go about it when you're heading out for a day on the water?
Yeah, so there's a lot of options these days with charts. You can get a lot of information, Google Earth, things like that, even before you've left the harbour. So a bit of background homework, it goes a long way. And for me, I think the key to catching fish offshore without getting too in-depth on tides and moon phases and things like that is just taking the time to set your sounder up right, positioning the transducer correctly, and being able to read the bottom at speed. If you can read at speed, you're fishing when you're driving, and that's, to me, the key to catching fish, is to, no matter what's happening, you're always on the hunt.
So much of fishing is about the gear that we use. Do you have essential pieces of gear that you've got to have on the boat with you when you go offshore, Colby?
Yeah, definitely. Just you want to get yourself a really good pair of sunnies. With me in the topwater fishing, not so much about the sounder, it's just about finding those areas with bait. And when you head out offshore, there's a lot of water out there that's got nothing, and then there's some pieces of water that have got a lot of bait. Those bait-rich areas are going to be your best option for topwater fishing. So if you get yourself a really good pair of polarised sunnies, you can see that bait from a long way away. Sometimes it just makes a bit of a ripple on the surface. Sometimes it's actually fish breaking the surface as they feed on the bait. But these areas are going to be prime areas to go and do all sorts of offshore fishing. But for me, with the topwater stuff, it's really an essential.
Ben, life changes pretty quickly and fishing has changed over the decades, and it always will. Change is inevitable. How have you seen offshore fishing change since you first got into it?
I suppose on the topwater scene, that's really exploded. I've noticed recently, and the type of lures and the amount of lures out there now, and the varieties, that's been the biggest change I've seen. They all seem to do the same thing as catch fishermen. I know that.
That's the first part of the puzzle, isn't it? Catch the fisherman.
Yeah, so it's different colours and those sort of things. But I think the biggest thing to take away from that is just being really confident with your gear. I think that goes to, that helps your journey out in the water, is making sure that you're really confident with what you're using, whether that be the rod and reel, or whether it be the type of sounder you're using, or even the fishing gear you're using, the lures especially, is just being really confident with what you got. If you haven't got the confidence in what's in your hand at the time or what you're looking at, it makes it very hard. I know that. It's and even for us guys, I know we're on the water a fair bit, is if you're not confident in the gear in your hands, it makes for a really long day.
Sam, I'm going to give you a hypothetical. You've got a father and son that bail you up at the boat ramp next weekend in Coffs when you're about to go out, and they say, I'm going to get into offshore fishing. Tell me 2 outfits I should get.
At the Coffs ramp, I'd say, start with a 4,000 size reel and that sort of 8 to 12 kilo rod, run 30 pound braid, 30 pound leader, couple of packets of jig heads and some soft plastics, and you really can't go wrong off Coffs. You'll catch your pearl perch, your tuskies, obviously your snapper. You can chase, kingfish up to maybe a metre if you're lucky. that will really set you in good stead. And then the second outfit, well, obviously, I would say top water. But top water fishing is not for everyone either. I mean, I've taken plenty of people who have 4 or 5 casts top water and go, this is too hard, because it's manually, physically, and sometimes emotionally demanding. When you put a day in casting consistently, you're not at a bite, not even a swirl, you start to see things that aren't there.
And the style of fishing you guys, it can be physically very taxing.
It is.
And that's before you even hook up to a fish.
Yeah, and you need to... our tennis players hit the ball and go, ugh. Sometimes I just make a ridiculous sound when I cast just to make myself feel better about this is my 10,000th cast for the day and I've caught nothing. But when it comes together, it's magic. And it's that hard work and grind that makes, it's what brings us back, I think.
There's pleasure to be had in the grind.
Yeah.
Colby, you get to go fishing next weekend too. You're heading off. What are you doing? Throwing baits or lures or a combination of both?
If I'm heading offshore, I'm mainly just going to be throwing lures these days. I will drop the odd bait, but yeah, definitely just take out a full roll of lures every time I go, because you never know what situation you're going to come across. Sometimes you might come across tuna busting up on little micro bait, and you got to have a bit of a lighter combo, a few small lures, cast at them. Other times you come across the GTs, they might have a school of Fewtrell balled up and they're eating really big lures. So yeah, I just try and take out a range of lures to cover a few different depths, poppers, stick baits, floating stick baits, sinking stick baits, and you don't have to have heaps of everything, just 1 or 2 of each is enough, and we'll cover a few bases for whatever you come across, because every day is different out there, that's for sure.
Now, Nico, our biggest fear as an angler is that the fish is eating a lure that we don't have with us on that day. As a result, we generally take a lot. Do you go for the slim approach like Colby, or do you take everything you own?
Yeah, I'm pretty heavy-handed on the boat. There's a fair old porcupine heading out of the boat ramp, 400 rods hanging out the back with a different lure on every rod, different jig on every rod. You just keep mixed up. Something is going to be what they're going to eat on that day, and I'm going to have it there, trust me.
And if you don't have it, you can buy it on the way home.
I'll make it while I'm out there if I've got to.
Timmy, what about you? Are you a bit of a I'm only taking 2 rods kind of guy, or do you have a rocket launcher full of a dozen different outfits on the back of the boat?
Well, I mean, offshore fishing, there's so many different varieties that you can use. I mean, you've got your top water gear, then you start getting into your jigging. You've got different PE styles for your jigging as well. I like to fish quite light, even when I am out in 130 metres down in Tassie chasing striped trumpeter. So I have an arsenal for, any occasion. You've got your overhead reels, if you're chasing your marlin, your 6500s and 5.5s if you're top water. I've got it all, because you don't know what's going to happen out there. And sometimes, the forecast, even for what's happened for me this week, I went out to Heron Island, and I had everything packed, ready to go, because we didn't know what was going to happen. The weather was terrible. All we could do was jig. But without having those combos there, you've just got to have that tackle ready to rumble, because you don't know what it's going to be like out there.
That's exactly right. The line I quite often use is that a fishing rod and reel is a tool to do a job. And you have different tools for doing all different jobs.
Yeah.
And when you're starting in fishing, you quite only have 2 tools in your toolbox, and then you let it grow and it expand. Sam, you were mentioning before about catching live bait. Does bait fish feature much in your fishing?
Not a lot these days, but there's still definitely a place for it. I mean, these days I'll be much more focused on larger baits for Spanish and kings, because for kings, I want them to choke on it, hopefully, and you'll weed out the smaller fish and get your bigger fish. And for Spanish, it's somewhat the same. Like, if you're going to put a bait out, make it one worthy of a proper fish to come along and eat. When chasing, I guess when we really use bait the most is chasing inshore small to medium black marlin. Rolly Boy loves, and for getting the kids into the fishing, strings of slimies is as entertaining as anything. And I've actually taken friends out who, when you're on the bait ground loading up on slimies, they don't want to leave. It's like, well, hang on, we're about to convert these into something a lot better than those. So, but I do once or twice a year have a float line session for snapper, or stray lining, I think they call it in New Zealand. And it really, really is a wonderful way to bring fish to you And when you're float lining, when a big red comes and grabs a bait and starts ripping line off the reel in free spool, and you have to engage the reel and belt the hooks into him, and it is something special. Not a lot these days, but yeah, there's certainly a place for it.
Now, fishing offshore has a lot of those epic moments, those epic catches, and online platforms such as YouTube now enable us to actually see that rather than just reading it in a written form in a magazine. I want each of you to think about an epic catch, and I want you to share it with me. Does anybody have any questions before we get to the stories? No? Ben, I'm going to start with you. Mr. GT, what's your epic catch, and was it a GT or was it something else?
Yeah, I can't really go past that first 50 kilo GT. That was top of the list for me. It was just such a build up for those few years to get to that fish, and then to get that fish actually ticked off. It was a lot of screaming and yelling and swearing and carrying on stuff that probably can't be repeated on the microphone here. But and then there was I suppose just some trips, some really epic trips that got ticked off the list that I'd been planning for a few years, and sometimes you don't get to do it in a full year or next year because of the weather or whatever. When you get that sort of Cape York trip ticked off the list, I think anyone that hasn't done it is make sure you get up to Cape York and get out and visit. The outer reef is, and I know these guys here have been there, that outer reef is the best spot in the world, I reckon, to fish. So if you can get out there, that's, to me, that's the top of...
It's Nirvana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nico, how about you? Now, you spent a lot of time on camera, holding a camera. Is your epic catch, did we get that on film, or did it happen when the camera wasn't rolling?
No, I've probably, like all the boys, got a story for a lot of epic fish and epic captures, but for me it was actually a destination, and on that trip I caught a land-based Mary Wrasse, so that's probably something that I won't forget in a long time. And they're an epic topwater fish, whether you're fishing for GTs or whatever. Any wrasse is a good wrasse, but to catch one land-based was really special. And where we went was so far in the middle of the South Pacific. It was a 6-day boat ride, and just, you can't get any more remote than that. So, that to me is probably the highlight of my fishing career.
A topwater eat and seeing a big fish come up behind your lure and eat it is it's heart in the mouth kind of stuff. What's your epic moment?
Yeah, mine for me was a few years in the making. About a year ago now, I caught a topwater sailfish, which I'd been after for many years. Topwater's not a good way to catch sailfish, that's for sure. But when you spend a lot of time on the water, you just get the odd chance every now and again. And over the last 10 years, I've probably had a handful of chances, and every time they've either just knocked the lure out of the way or ended up at the boat and haven't eaten the lure and just hasn't hooked up. And then, a couple of years ago, I found one chasing some garfish down a reef edge and threw the popper in, and he just ate the popper perfectly, and I got hooks in him, and I got him and landed him and got to go in and get some awesome photos on the beach with it, and then let him go and watch him swim off. And that was just a cool moment, because I know how hard it is to actually get hooks in one on the surface, and got to watch him eat it, and everything was perfect. And that was one of the moments for me that I'll remember forever in topwater fishing. But as Ben said as well, now it's more about the trips and the fish, like getting to the Cape or remote seamount and stuff, and doing a trip like that is just all time for me. It's an accomplishment just to tick off that journey.
And the common thread I'm getting from all of you is it's about setting those goals and working towards them, and sometimes that work can take years and years to get it. Sammy, what's your moment?
It's been a privilege to, this sport is the love of my life, really, and has been since I was 3. So
that and your son.
Pardon?
That and your son.
Yeah, definitely. But there's been some big topwater kings. I haven't cracked 50 with a GT, but got really close. 45 or thereabouts. Some big yellowfin in the 60s and just under 70 kilos. But for me, it was, taking Rolly Boy when he was 5 to some of the Barra dams and to see the effort he put into, what people don't see outside of social media is him standing on a trampoline, pretending it was the boat, flicking barra lures around on bait casters and saying, "Dad, can you be a barra?" every day. And I'd impart the lure action for him and then be that tick, that barra bite. He's got to practice his hook set and then fight me being a barra. We took him up there he jumped a couple off, and then he got a 95, and then in the next trip we went up, he donged a metre 17 on his own, and to watch that in the full moon, I saw the fish jump when it first left the water. I went, oh Jesus, that's a proper animal, that thing, and he's sort of pumping and whining as I've taught him to do, and he had his thumb over the top of the braid and it's taken off, and I saw him flinch because it burned his thumb, and everyone knows what that feels like. It proper stings. And then he gets the fish maybe to the front row of chairs there, and it's jumped in the moonlight and my head torch, and he said, oh, it's a big bopper, Dad. And I just melted. I went, yeah, that is. Got him in the net, and he goes, oh, Dad, you're going to have to help me hold this one. I'm like, yeah, mate, that's a 20 plus kilo fish, maybe 24 kilos, and that to me is what this sport is all about.
Yeah. He'll remember that when he's 80. Tim, what's your epic moment?
Mine was much like Colby, a couple of years in the making, and that was the pinnacle of catching my first swordfish down in Tasmania. And that was just such a big learning curve for me too, because you've got so many things that can go wrong when you are offshore and you're that deep and you're in 550 metres of water, but you've got your breakaway brick, getting the rig set up as well, fishing with circle hooks, trying to get a great pin so you can feel the whole fight and then, potentially let that fish go. It took me about 30 drops and 20 odd trips to actually make that happen. A lot of nights as well, just prior to, I mean, you guys have probably experienced this too. When you know you've got a big day of fishing ahead, I just can't sleep. And I'll be there laying in bed, just eyes wide open, wide awake, and this happened.
It's a Christmas Eve feel, isn't it? You're excited about what's coming tomorrow.
It's just the unknown, and that's the addiction. It's the unknown of what's going to happen. But yeah, finally got tied on a swordfish on a tide change, and we fought it for about 2.5 hours. Live streamed the whole thing as well. We somehow had reception out there. And it was just such a memorable moment, just looking at the comments coming through on my live stream of everyone just being like, get into the back corner, come and do this, try doing that, hold him, quick. Like, just getting all of that immediate feedback too. Everyone was in on it, and it was just such a memorable moment once we finally got it to the boat. And it turns out we caught that the day before the Tom Jenkins Memorial Competition. Mm-hmm. It would have actually won that whole comp, and then we didn't turn a reel the rest of the trip. So we were kissed on the pecker, and we made it happen, made the most of it, and yeah, that was my memorable catch. It was awesome. So
you've told us about what you've done. What do you want to do, Colby? What's the next frontier? What's the next goal?
Obviously, I want to catch a 50 kilo GT like Buster, but it hasn't happened for me yet. That's a goal that I want to tick off as well. But it's something like, you say you want to have it as your goal, but it's something that you can't really go out and target. You can only do your best every time you go out and just hope for it. There's plenty of spots where you could catch one, but there's plenty of spots where you probably won't catch one as well. So I'm just going to spend the next few years going out, enjoying my GT fishing, catching what I can catch, and one day that 50 kilo one will come along and it'll be a pretty awesome feeling.
Nico, have you got a big mark on your to-do list or something you want to achieve?
Yeah, I've got two. Both got bills on their faces this year. I want to smack 1,000 pounder solo. That's the start of my next target. It might take the next 10 years to do it, but I really want to get 1,000 pound black on my own. And I want to be the first one to catch a sword off Port Douglas recreationally. So the long liners have caught them, and there's a few of us up there who've been mucking around a bit, and we're starting to get into it. So hopefully before long, one of us will catch one.
Benny, is it a species, location? What's on your hit list?
Definitely top water doggy. I got my first few little doggies, but they've all been off the jig, and nothing of decent size yet, but top water doggy for me, and I'll put the cue on the rack, I reckon, if I can do that.
And Sammy, is your next goal on your home water, or is it a little further afield?
No, I think it is. I mean, Benny, the top water dogs are amazing. I've seen Mike catch one, and we're lucky enough on our last trip to Vanuatu to dong a few off the roof, so that's an amazing goal to aspire to. But mine locally is a top water king over 30, which I think is going to be in...
What's your biggest so far?
25, thereabouts, 24.8. That fish is going to be in the, I'm going to guess, that metre 50 class, metre 50 plus. Once they're in the metre 40s, if they're a healthy fish in really good nick, they'll be 20 plus. But that fish is the ultimate in New South Wales waters, I think. If you're going to top water a fish, your yellowfin are truly amazing. If you're going to compare the two, you'd say if you've got a top water king over 30, that's going to be a top water yellowfin over 80. That's a grind, that fish. There's kingfish are so challenging. They can be right there, right in front of you all day and swim after your lure and just fade off.
You guys have got so much patience. Tim, what's your next goal?
I've seen it recently down in Tasmania, and one of the boys down there got a top water barrel. I think that'd be cool to tick off, so a 100 kilo plus barrel. But what I'm really excited for in the coming months is just a small black marlin run just off the sunny coast. I'm a pretty passionate citizen scientist, so just collecting as much data on little 8 kilo combos and tagging them and just being able to hand over that data as well, I think for me is very valuable. Just being able to play my part and do my part in the fishing community and provide some valuable information that is going to help look after our fishery in the future. So little black marlin for me.
You've been
I'm really
a good
excited
steward
for.
of the resource, mate. Well done. I acknowledge that. Where do you think offshore fishing is heading for the future? How's it looking? Is it rosy? Is it gloomy? Nico, how do you see it?
It's just getting stronger and stronger. More people are getting into the industry. Fishing's obviously huge. Like, look at AFTA today, how many people are walking through the door. So I think more people are exposed to it with the likes of social media and YouTube. It's everywhere now. Fishing's huge. It's just such an incredible sport to be a part of, and it's just great to see so many passionate people. So I think offshore fishing's just going to go ahead in leaps and bounds.
Benny, I'm going to give you the closing word. Any thoughts on what's ahead for current and aspiring offshore anglers?
Well, you can just see in the room today, around the place, how many young guys are around here and girls that are getting into the sport. So it's only going to go ahead and leaps and bounds. What's a little bit scary for me is how far the technology we use to go and catch fish, how far that's come in the last few years, and how that's going to improve, I suppose, being able to catch fish. So that's got to keep pushing forward, no doubt, and keep things ticking over. So I think it's only going to get bigger and better, and more players coming to the game, and it's only going to keep growing.
Well, you guys are great role models for the style of fishing that you do. You inspire a lot of people, and I'm confident that we've shared a lot of great stories and plenty of information here today. Thank you very much, folks. Put your hands together for our guys.